All right, how's everybody doing tonight? Stand over there, it's right in the bright light. Okay. Hey, welcome. Yeah, I guess you guys have me like tucked in the corner a little bit. I'm used to walking around, but this will be okay. Yeah, so tonight we're going to talk about architecture decision records, and really what I hope by the end of the session that everyone feels comfortable creating decision records, documenting your decisions, and basically having a good enough handle on it to be able to take it to your team and show them what to do too, because it's a really fantastic practice. So what we're going to do tonight, so we're going to start off with some theory bits, covering kind of some of the basics. What is an architecture decision record, and how can they help your team a bit? And hopefully about half of our time tonight, maybe a little bit more, is going to be spent actually doing. So we're going to take some time to try it out and share them with each other, learn what works, what doesn't, and get some real practice in kind of a sandbox where it doesn't matter so much. So that's the plan this evening. I feel like I'm getting some feedback. Are you all okay out there? Okay, awesome. Great. So I don't know. Here's a motivating example, 100% hypothetical thing that actually happened in real life. All the tests fail when I run them. What's going on? Yeah, about that. So we decided only to support SSL yesterday, and now all of our test doubles are requiring certificates. Thought you knew. When did we decide that? Right. So big decision was made that fundamentally changed the development environment. I had no idea what was going on. Some kind of a disconnect within our team, except for these kinds of things seem to happen, somewhat regularly, right? When everything is working well, most dev teams should operate kind of like Voltron, right? You've got all different people doing their thing, and when everybody is humming along, they come together to form this amazing, awesome robot, right? So everybody's an individual within there doing their thing, but somehow you're able to form one mind, right, and become this one piece, right, or a leg, as the case may be. So we need to make decisions so that we can move forward, right? But even if we're making decisions, we can't move fast unless everybody understands. Okay, so there's kind of two pieces to that. Just saying that you're going to do something isn't necessarily good enough. You have to get that idea out there, and everyone has to comprehend what's going on. Kind of a common way this goes down on my teams is, gather around everyone and let me tell you about the architecture, right? We've got a very strong tradition of oral storytelling, right? We'll get at the whiteboard, we'll jot down some notes, we'll just kind of tell about, what happened over the past week, things like that. Oral history is fantastic. I think it's really a great way to share design decisions that you're making, especially while you're still exploring. Right, so if things are churning, if things are going very fast, taking the time to write stuff down, well, it's going to be out of date, sometimes within minutes. So there's a time and a place for that. Oral history has other limitations as well. So it generally has short reach. I can only spread the good word of our design to the people who are there at the time, right? So if you have, 2 members of your team at a whiteboard, that's as far as the ideas are going to go. They're not going to get much further. Leads to something very time consuming to share. So you have to go basically point to point and communicate what the architecture is and how you're sharing it. And quite frankly, it changes every time you tell the story, right? So it's kind of organically evolving over time. And if you don't constantly refresh, you're going to forget. People start to forget and memories fade. With that in mind, eventually we do need to write something down, and that's really what the decision records technique is all about. Lots of ways that we write stuff down. A really fantastic technique is to capture these design decisions and things like that in the code. Let's see here, code is lossy when it comes to things like rationale, right? So it's really good, or it can be very good at structure, but it's not necessarily going to tell you why something happened or the history of how you arrived at a certain place. There's techniques for kind of getting around that, but by and large, code is good, but not necessarily sufficient in all cases. Wikis, documents, does everybody have like a Google Drive or Box or something like that, where you just dump everything? It can be tough. I got email on here. I don't know that anyone on my team sends email anymore, which is kind of amusing. But my favorite technique, though, never erase the whiteboards. So you just always jot it up there and you leave everything just in the environment all the time, which eventually leads to not being able to erase the whiteboards anymore, which is a different kind of problem. But all these things are great, but it really depends on, I guess, how good they are depends on what you put into them, right? So oral history alone is not going to be sufficient, although you can get pretty far with it. Writing stuff down is great, but you got to capture the right things when you put them in there, okay? So let's go ahead and dive into that a little bit. Architecture decision records. Yeah, we'll start with the A just to make sure we're all kind of on the same page. The architecture part. So here's a definition. All right, so software architecture is the set of significant design decisions about how the software is organized to promote desired quality attributes and other properties. Let's dissect this for a sec. I guess before we do that, quality attributes. Does everybody know what a quality attribute is? Or I'll just define it real quick. This is basically the bread and butter of architecture. We're talking about the ilities. Some people call them non-functional requirements or quality requirements. Really what you're trying to do is qualify how well a certain design does something or how well your software does something, not what it does, okay? So you can take say a calculator app. It has a feature to add, right? 2 numbers, right? But let's say it takes 10 minutes to do that, right? Maybe you have a performance problem. Maybe you should have designed it to add better. You're still getting the right answer. It's functionally correct, but the qualities of that particular calculator are rather poor. Things like reliability. What if it just randomly gives the wrong answer sometimes? Every 10th time or something. It might be functionally correct, but the reliability is very poor in that case. So we can design for those types of things. That's what the architecture is really all about. Those quality attributes are leading to help us decide how the software is organized, okay? And what we're talking about there are things like structures, okay? All right, so this is kind of the theory bits, but a structure is basically an element in a relation. You take a brick and the mortar, the peanut butter and the bread, you slam them together, and then that's how you end up with a structure. So anytime you're drawing boxes and lines, boxes basically are your elements in most cases. Lines are going to be your relations, all right? In retrospect, I should have put some examples that are a bit more concrete. Layers, right? So in a layered style architecture, your layer is an element, and then there is an allowed to use relation that tells you which layers are allowed to use which other layers. It's a super theory, maybe not quite practical way of describing a way of thinking about these things. In that particular example, not very interesting, but as things grow, it can become a very helpful technique. So with these elements and relations, lots of different ways to combine them, right? So these are all mammals, I think. Yeah. Lots of different ways that you can combine bones and muscle to create different kinds of animals, different structures involved in each one. Yeah, or I guess in the case of that weird picture, no structure at all. So don't do that. All right, just to dive a little bit deeper on this one. Typically with architecture, we like to think about it in terms of the 3 different types of things or 3 different buckets. So things like, here's my examples. Things like, let's see here, module would be the design time stuff. So that is things that you can see in a file when you open it up, right? Classes. Packages, layers, things like that. That's one kind of type of structure that we deal with. Component and connectors dealing with runtime structures, right? So you take that class and you instantiate it. You don't have a class anymore. You have an object, right? You have a thing that is running in memory. Okay, that's a different kind of structure that we're dealing with. So yeah, objects, tiers, processes, threads. It's a different set of elements, different set of relations, and lets you deal with different quality attributes as well. And then finally, the last bucket is allocation. The last type that we deal with is allocation. Basically, you're mapping from one of these types to another. So from module to component and connector, or sometimes from these things into the real world. So some typical examples would be if you're deploying to a server, or if you're installing onto a container, something like that. That server, that container is a physical thing, right? Even people, right, can be an element in this world. If you have team A, working on component, foo, that's a good example of an allocation style thing. All right, that's probably the most theoretical this is going to be, and then we're going to get super practical after this. Everybody doing okay? All right, cool. All right, ADR, the D is for decision. That should be pretty obvious. So looking back at the definition, with architecture, typically we're talking about significant decisions, not every little thing that you could possibly do. So maybe you don't necessarily care what the names of your methods are. Maybe we're looking more coarse-grained than that, right? Maybe it's an arrangement of classes or even arrangement of packages. Something more significant, all right? What does that mean exactly? So yeah, back to that idea of quality attributes. So if you are influencing something like scalability, reliability, availability, maintainability, testability, on and on and on, those are the types of things that we really care about, and those are the types of decisions that should probably be captured in some way from an architecture perspective. If you're impacting the cost or the schedule in a meaningful sort of way, those are good things that are probably architectural. External organizations, if a decision that you're making is going to cause some other team to do work, maybe you ought to talk about that and write it down. One way that I want to say this comes from Amazon, thinking about things in terms of like two-way doors and one-way doors. If this is a decision and you make it and there's no coming back, that is going to be way more significant than something that can be easily undone. So that's another way potentially of thinking about that. Yeah, we'll just stop there. So yeah, it's good. All right, examples. So responsibility. So component X is responsible for doing something. In this case, sending an email. You've assigned a responsibility. You just made an architectural decision right there by saying that component is going to be the thing that sends the email. Implications of stuff. So because we did whatever decision, now things are going to be more difficult to test. Okay, so you just influenced testability. That is something that might be worth discussing as a team. Third-party library dependencies, always a good call, especially if you have to pay for them. Always something you should think about a bit and possibly capture. Let's see here. Moving packages or modules around if you're doing major refactors is potentially architectural in nature. That's coming back to that module style structure. Tech debt. Managing tech debt is definitely something that architects should be thinking about. If you're making strategic decisions, doing the wrong thing on purpose, that is sometimes something that you ought to capture or think about capturing. I guess this last example, if whatever you're doing causes everybody to have to like redo their entire environment, or if you're restricting or changing freedoms or things like that, potentially architectural, right? So yeah, I can't think of a real example, but oh, here's one. So we just recently redid the Webpack build processes that caused everybody to have to bump in a certain way and do call the build processes in a certain way that was different than what it was before. Net result was huge. It improved build times a lot, but it did have a pretty significant impact across the organization. All right. Last but not least, the R part, the record. Okay. So this technique that we're going to learn tonight that we're talking about comes from Michael Nygaard. He was the author of Release It, and I guess back in 2011, he wrote this blog post that defined architecture decision records as, well, a short text file similar to an Alexandrian pattern that describes a set of forces and a single decision in response to those forces. So the key bits of this are basically we're talking about small, discrete, simple, easy to read text files, a set of forces. So that is the state of the world, the facts of nature, the facts of life that are influencing some decision that you care about. And that's really all it comes down to. The Alexandrian pattern stuff is super interesting if you want to go deeper. Christopher Alexander is a fascinating person who has nothing to do with software, but we totally steal from him all the time. Yeah, you should check out his books if you're into design types of stuff. The Oregon experiment, I think, is one of the big ones. Basically defined what we would call modern building code, stuff like that. All right, so ADRs, what it comes down to, you define the context that is kind of the state of the world, you record your decision, and then as a result of that, applying that decision, there are consequences. And this, in a nutshell, is also how you define any pattern, which is pretty cool. Yeah, contexts are kind of the forces at play, your decision, the thing that you want to have implemented, and then as a result of that, the consequences that come out. And this is kind of what they look like. So this is an ADR from a project that I was on at one point. Pretty simple, and we'll dive into this so you can actually read it. Use the pipe and filter library. So pipe and filter is a particular architecture pattern, and all we're saying is we've got a library that implements it, and we're going to use it, right? That's the decision. So the context, the forces at play, these are stated as facts up front. You try and use plain language. You don't want to get too flowery. And this one is all about talking, let's see here, this is talking about things like, in the past, we're writing things that were called agents, basically small processes that have a single task. We thought it was a good idea to use pipes and filters. But our engineers who actually designed that system left on vacation, and then everybody else just mangled the heck out of the original code base. So that led Joe, one of our teammates, to write a library that would help us better enforce the pattern. And that library exists. All right. So we're going to use that library. That's all we're saying there is we're going to use it. The status bit is interesting. So status is basically saying that you can, decisions change over time, right? So in this case, we've accepted it as a team, but maybe a couple weeks from now or a couple months from now, you're going to change your mind. You don't delete the record, you keep it, and you just update its status. So you kind of have almost like an event stream, right? A decision log, right? Building up over time, so you can have historical context. So that's what that status is all about. Yeah, you could have accepted, deprecated, basically create your own, whatever's useful. Teams do lots of things for that. All right, consequences. So as a result of that, applying that decision, we're going to use that library. These are all the things that happen, both good and bad. All right, let's see here. So yeah, a good thing, we've improved our testability. All the filters are completely decoupled. It's easier to maintain. Oh, wow, concurrency, we're going to improve our performance. Lots of really awesome stuff going on. Some bad stuff. Oh no, if there's uncaught race conditions, we could have major failures because we're not as confident in the library as we should be. And we've restricted the world a little bit. Logging is going to be more difficult for us, right? So we chose to get all these good things, but then there were also some bad consequences that came with it. Trade-offs, right? Okay, so yeah, capturing decisions as we are making those decisions lets us build up this decision log over time. So that same ADR, I think it was this is a different list. This is actually the old one that we were deprecating. But you can see that we started off with a simple, tech. Oh, we're going to use Golang for writing this stuff, and we're going to use this Go convey thing for testing, and we're going to use our pipe and filters. We're going to run some stuff on timers. You can see over time how everything is coming together, which is pretty cool.
Michael,
yes.
you decided Go was a really bad idea. Is that a new ADR, or do you edit the ADR one, use Go? and change it?
Yeah, so ideally you would keep the decision that you have, and you would add a new one that you can then reference to say, hey, we used to use Go. Or we are using Go at the moment. The team liked it, didn't like, likes it, doesn't like it. We've experienced these problems or these benefits. That's your context, right? And you can reference the original decision that oh yeah, we chose to use Go. And then you're going to make a new decision. I don't know, we're going to use, Kotlin or something, right? Sticking your new hotness there.
Will you change the status on the first one?
Yeah, so in that case, I would change the status on the first one to say it's deprecated, and I would even add like a two-way link in that case. Really with this kind of stuff, and I guess you can see that we're storing it in GitHub here. We were storing it in the same repository as the code, but that's not necessarily a requirement. In this case, these were for us as developers, so that's where they landed. Yeah, but generally, so by doing that, you create history, and now you don't have to go off and write more documents to capture that rationale. You can kind of almost play back the history, which is pretty powerful.
How do you manage the record for, when you have a larger program or a larger system, you may have many different pieces of software, right? And so do you manage a central repository for the whole architecture in practice, or do you document just the specific changes on the individual pieces?
I've done all those things.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's come back to that, and I can share some more stuff if there's interest in that on kind of like different things that have worked, experiments we've tried, stuff like that. The answer is yes.
Okay.
You can do all those things. So the best thing might be to try some stuff out and see something that works for your team. And unfortunately, there's like pros and cons. Like they all were good. Yeah, I want to pause here. Any other questions or stuff? I've kind of been rolling through. Now that I've asked, of course, everyone quiets down. That's okay.
Some ways looking at the format, it reminded me of Python has PEPs, Python enhancement proposals, and those are written before the fact, and then they're either approved. And in this case, you're just documenting something after discussions, or do you ever like write something and circulate it?
A little bit of both.
Ahead of time?
Yeah, a little bit of both. So sometimes we'll create these things up front as a proposal. We'll float it around, see what happens. Sometimes it gets rejected by the team, and that's okay, because that kind of path that we didn't choose to go down now becomes a part of the reason or the rationale leading to the actual decision that we do choose. People also get super frustrated when their stuff gets rejected like that. So we tended to, I guess on the teams that I'm on, we tend to talk about things a lot informally and then capture it after the fact. But I don't know, it all depends kind of the size of the organization. That's not practical in a lot of cases. So on my small team, that works well. But when I bubble up to 30, 40 people or more, the proposal process is really the only way to go.
Do you ever link like commit hashes or anything in them just to be able to go back to the work and say this is what actually it looks like?
Ooh, that's interesting. So I'll go ahead. I'm going to mention this person again later, but there's a guy, Ken Power, and I'll give you a link for his stuff. Has been doing a lot of research into different ways that people use ADRs and different ways that people use decision records. And that is one of the things that he has looked into is, we said we were going to do a thing. Did we actually do it? And adding, I think in the template that I showed you all, it's a very, very simple and straightforward. He's been experimenting with doing more things like what was the mood of the team? What was the follow-up and how did we actually like it? Did we see the positive and negative consequences that we actually wanted? I think there's a lot of cool room for experimentation with this technique.
So these consequences are future tense, kind of like this is what we're going to go back and refactor the ones.
It's a hope of, kind of what we expect to happen. Yeah, and it's what you're trying to do is capture the trade-offs. This is the world today. We chose to do this thing. Now, as a result of that, this is what we expect to, be the new world. Yeah, so I guess future tense could be a good way to think about it.
So even along with, in this example, the ADRs were stored in the code repository, how do you distribute that to the stakeholders or notify them of a change? Is it in person and just say, we're going to capture the record here? and we're going to get either buy-in or here's a mandate forward, just so you all know.
Yeah, let's see what I got here.
On, like,
We're gonna go rogue.
guide.
We don't need slides. Let's see what else I got for you. So I do want to get to that exercise, but these are all awesome questions. So I'm gonna front load some stuff here. What do I have? Yeah, so let's go ahead and bop over here. We'll bop to the end and we'll jump around, and I'll even pull in some other presentations and stuff if we need to. Yeah, so getting it out to different stakeholders. So we were using GitHub in this case. We just integrated in with the pull request system, right? So it was, how is it announced? Well, here you go, here's a PR, and we invite your feedback and comments, and that's the way that we handled it on this particular team. Not all of your stakeholders are going to do code, right? Not everybody's going to be in GitHub. In that case, you got to kind of go where your stakeholders are. So if they're using, I don't know, SharePoint or something, you'll have to figure out a way to kind of get documents in a space where they're able to use it. That might be more difficult or clunky, but it's far better for people to kind of see the stuff than to not use it at all. Yeah, I think that's the key. Contextually close to where it's used is like the main thing that you're gonna, that you want to try and find. So, what other kind of stuff do I have here? So, oh no, I've done it. Yeah, maybe we can talk about this stuff, or I'll pull in some other things in a minute. So I've got some other data that I can share on how we've used ADRs for growing skills on the team. So it's kind of a fantastic technique for that. Basically, these are small little discrete things that you can delegate to anybody on your team, right? So junior, senior, whatever. So I use it a lot for kind of coaching and training opportunities. We might work together or pair on making the decision, but then, hey, why don't you go off and document it? I've documented the last one, so you do this one. Yeah, super easy to review. The cost of failure, very, very low, right? Even if it takes 2 or 3 revisions, it's just a document, right? It's not the end of the world. Yeah, fantastic for kind of pairing and stuff like that. In terms of how to go about the peer review, basically, you want to try and get the whole team involved as much as possible. So I'm a huge fan of decentralizing design authority. So instead of having kind of one person in charge that's kind of telling everybody what to do, this is all about leveling the whole team up. And this is a mechanism that you can do, that you can use to do that. Let's see here. I have seen examples where, and kind of experienced where, coming into work one day and I overhear it's like, oh yeah, that's something, let's make an ADR for that. It's like, yes, it's working, right? It feels really good. People can go off and make decisions on their own, and then we have a mechanism for bringing it back so that everybody can be aware, including your tech leads or whoever is kind of making sure things stay on the rails. For that to work, though, you kind of have to make it a habit. Yeah, you want to hear that phrase, or you want to be asking that phrase to kind of help train people when these significant decisions are happening, asking the question or kind of prodding or prompting. Hey, do we need an ADR for that? Very, very easy way to do it. Tracking ADRs in the backlog. So I don't know, I stick anything in the backlog that I want my team to think about. So if we said we want to do an ADR for something, then let's make it visible on our board, and let's make sure that people actually are held accountable to making it a thing. Lots of templates out there. I've got another link that I can share with everybody for tons of different templates that have been used, but you want to have a template. Something I've been trying recently is ADR parties. So every Friday at 2, we get together for a half hour and just churn out ADRs. I guess it's not much of a party, but it's fun. Yes?
So you have this question, do we need to record an ADR? Do you have a front-loaded document or something that defines the ground rules for the team? Earlier you were kind of hand-wavy about, if it's granular, we documented it. If it's granular, we don't. So how do you set those rules and enforce them within a given team?
So in the template that I use, let's see if I can find it here. We have this list. So we've got a template like this, which shows, and I'll make this big so everybody can see it a little bit better. So this is just a markdown template, and it's telling you all the stuff that I'm telling you, like what is context, what is a decision, right? this section describes our response to the forces and stated in an active voice, we will ... right?
So that defines the
That's the format. And then along with that, there's other stuff around it to kind of teach just in time. One of the things that we include is this list here, which is kind of rules of thumb. What are the things that we think are significant on our team? So if you see one of these things come up, then you should think twice and maybe record an ADR. And maybe you have a different list for your team. Or maybe not everybody understands exactly what this means, right? And that's okay too. It takes time to kind of build up the knowledge or whatever. Examples too. So I usually end up writing the first, 5 or 6 on a new team, 5 or 6 ADRs on a new team. First by myself, then pairing, getting reviews as we go, and then starting to delegate. So there's also kind of a ramp up period in that way. Does that answer your question a bit?
more or less. I'll digest that as you continue.
Okay, cool. So I don't know. We're just hopping around. So why don't we do this? Let's just get to it and try and write a couple of these things and see how it works out. Is that cool with everybody? All right. Blah, 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 blah. All right, practice time. Let's do it. And I'll dig up some more stuff since there seems to be like interest in different aspects of things. So what we're going to do tonight is work in pairs or small groups. And if you don't want to, that's cool too. You can work by yourself or not at all. Participation is optional. The prompt is we're going to design a smart toaster. All right, it's going to perfectly toast your bread. It's voice activated, learns your breakfast preferences, and I don't know, it's connected to the internet because why not? And we're going to create a little decision log tonight. So probably 2, maybe 3 decisions, depending on how much time we have. Get some practice, and we'll kind of share and talk about the decisions that we're writing down as we go. And I'm really sad to report this is a real product. I didn't make this up, so it's an actual thing. Pay the bills. I don't know why you would want your toast to tell you that, but he looks really happy about it. So ground rules for this, just to make sure we're all kind of on the same page here. There really are no right or wrong answers. We're just exploring tonight, right? So we're just trying things out. I don't actually have any idea how much time is left, but I will try and keep an eye on the clock. And if you all could help me with that too. It's a pretty small group, so we should be fine with that. Yeah, you're already asking questions. Just keep it rolling. And the prompt is super duper vague. So use your experience to fill in some gaps. I'm not telling you exactly what to do, but use your imagination and your experience to kind of get the most out of the exercise for you. And yeah, have fun with it. If you're not having fun, maybe you're doing it wrong. This should be a little fun. The end results should look, I don't know, something like this. And I've got pencil and paper up here. You're free to use a laptop or whatever you want to record these things. But we're just going to create ADRs. So the same thing I just showed you: title, context, decision, consequences. And that's pretty much all there is to it. All right. Questions before we get started?
Can you leave the template on the screen?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So meet your team. So if you could take a couple minutes, self-organize into small groups or on your own if you want. Meet somebody. And I've got pencil and paper up front here. Yeah, there's a bunch of material online, but I can get more.
I just have a few minutes, so I can't really stay too long.
Oh, no worries.
Will they be posted on the Code Supplies?
I have no idea, but I can get whatever to wherever I can. So here, take a card and cost email, and then if I can, yeah, I'll put it on.
Yeah, this is, thank you. Awesome.
This is your first meetup?
Oh no, like I haven't been coding for very long.
Oh,
It's
okay.
like a year or so. Yeah. So I don't really know how.
Probably have the concepts down.
Yeah, I have some concepts.
This is a risk too, because it's more like structure than you know. It's you don't know a certain language or anything.
This is like I need to know like a weird like Wi-Fi protocol or something, right?
immediately jump to like using an Arduino to prototype,
Okay.
but I
Okay.
don't
Makes sense.
I
know if
was
that.
thinking you definitely need Unicode support.
Yeah,
Increasingly
because people want emojis on their
Remember, we run over here. And over here it was.
Look really careful, you can just kind of see.
That's how you know.
I use
But,
that same iPad and pen. Love it.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
All right.
My work
So,
sold them for like half price.
we'll give it another minute.
Well, CES has pads with on the front of the laptop. Oh, sorry.
There will not be a test later, so you can make up new features if you want to. So. All right, looks like everybody's doing pretty well there. So your first task, so we got to build some context real quick amongst your team. So our first task that we're going to do, about 7 minutes, give or take, you need to actually kind of design your system. And obviously you're not going to be able to design the whole thing, but you can create a context diagram. You can invent some stuff for how a smart toaster might work. Choose whatever area interests you or maybe where your experience is. If you're an embedded, systems programmer, maybe you want to go and talk about stuff in the toaster. If you're more of a cloud IT person, maybe you want to talk about the components and how they come together. If you don't know what any of that stuff is, I don't know, make something else up. It's totally fine. So lean on your experience for this. A general context diagram is probably enough. If you're struggling, sprinkle in some buzzwords and you will probably arrive at something that will help us for the next part of the exercise. So about 7 minutes, give or take, and go.
Yeah, I can see it. Old-fashioned toaster, 4 slots. Then you get fancy, you get different cables, Japanese style. That's right. Maybe you get a dual full color.
There we go.
If you do that, we could build a screen that's actually going to be smart screen.
Smart screen, a touch screen, right?
Like Alexa, you combine where they give you the chips. Alexa does all the work for you. So that would be another way.
We've got a Wi-Fi.
So they can watch.
I know, right? This thing's gonna run great on my phone. Why not? You definitely.
That's the thing about this program, is that the interfaces and other things that kind of skew so much.
see what you're saying.
Those breads, voice activated.
Or we just avoid it.
I think the negative is you can translate commands to
So I don't
voice
know
commands.
enough
Like
about
if you know, Alexa maybe translate voice commands to something software can understand.
yeah, but if we have
Alexa
a
can do
Wi-Fi
that.
connection, I don't know if we
This will be just
global thrower here. And then we'll
You would need to know how to navigate with
Machine learning.
Yeah, this would be
user satisfaction with like with a frowny face to the
That makes some people, right? Yeah.
Let's do the frowny face to the
Capnometer.
The camera's good because it'll see what kind of bread you're about to put it in. Because like different breads toast.
Or like flip on the bagel mode.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that cameras are inside of it, so that
You don't need to choose which way the bagel is.
Oh wow. Wait, how? How would you do that?
I have a camera on the inside.
yeah, like a real thick piece of like.
Using your bread, you're not on the whitelisted basis, it just burns the bread. Burns the house down. Sprays all over the place from Intruder, one's breakfast. Intruder, one's breakfast.
Who should we use for our machine learning? I'm assuming we would use someone, or we make it ourselves.
I'm not sure what should say.
I'm pretty sure the model doesn't exist right now, so we would have to make it ourselves.
Really?
I think, well, we could use TensorFlow if we want to throw it up.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, just put TensorFlow.
Just for TensorFlow.
Can we kind of like export like recognition, like image recognition to like Google?
Yeah. All the big cloud providers do it.
Yeah, yeah. But you don't think that's what we were doing?
They're not going to tell you the type of toast. They're more generalized, like
Gotcha.
Yeah,
toast.
we're gonna be the toast recognition experts
Yes.
in the world.
That's the model we'll create.
Voice activation is probably something easy to export. I mean, you've got all these attached like things. We could probably just make get somebody else to do it.
Yeah. He was saying that you can buy the Alexa chips and then use their SDK.
Yeah, they have a hardware SDK. So like, yeah, I wouldn't sell like one.
Oh, cool.
I think we should have Alexa and a speaker to it.
Duct tape. Echo to the side of the toaster. Done.
This is gonna be one of the greatest.
In order to better
We just run it through a smart fridge. The toaster's free, but you have to buy the fridge.
I think
Make some marketing. Yeah.
So we input
Context, processing power may not be.
Yeah.
Yeah, we gotta pull the
so
things
say
context, decision, status, and consequences.
oh yeah.
So what's the context of our first ADR? Well, I was, yeah, it needs cloud. So what's the context? Why do we need cloud? The context is yeah.
They're pretty good. All right, go ahead and take another minute, wrap up. We're gonna move on.
So you need to be easy to
All right. So for this first one, because I'm not sure where everybody is with everything, we're going to break this down. We're going to do this in steps for this very first one. Training wheels. All right. So it's all good. You'll be good. So task number 2. All right, or maybe 3. I've lost count. The first thing we're going to do is make a decision. And I know that might sound a little bit backwards based on some of the things we were talking about because it's in the middle, but this is really the basis for trying to decide what context we are going to want to talk about. So take about 3 minutes as a group, pick one of the things that you talked about, and let's just call it your first decision. Write it down. You can just do a sketch if you want. Eventually, though, we're going to want to see it in the the kind of active imperative voice. We will do this thing. Think about some of the ideas around significance that we were talking about in the beginning. Is it an architectural kind of thing, right? So yeah, not oh, we're going to use camel casing for all the method names, but maybe does this influence a quality attribute or a key functional requirement, something like that. Yeah, keep it brief. So we're looking for like maybe one sentence. If you can get it down to a pithy phrase, that is really what the ideal is. So yeah, go.
So what's our decision?
So that the user doesn't have a choice, which is yeah, but I'm just saying don't even worry about that now. Just make it yourself and make everything like some candles.
All right.
Encrypt the toaster password. Hashing takes too long and you need your toaster.
Oh yeah.
Well, here's the one that we actually have 2 choices on. So we know we're Raspberry Pi.
Could also say like we will use audio streaming so that we can send the audio to the cloud as fast as possible.
Figured out the first decision.
Here's a monstrosity.
Yeah. I mean, it has to be. It has to be. Yeah, you'd have to like.
All right. Does everybody have at least one decision?
We will use that.
Everybody have one decision? Anybody feel comfortable sharing your decision that you're going to tackle first? All right, let's hear it.
So we decided we were going to use the cloud as a backend to host our perfectly toasted algorithm for our toaster. Yeah.
Backend, all right, cool. So we'll use cloud.
No toast and bread if there's no internet.
All right.
Very important decision.
All right. It seems, is that significant? Do people think that's a significant one, or is it kind of not very meaty? Yeah, it seems significant. Seems very significant. Does anybody else feel like sharing their decision that they're gonna tackle?
To offload the voice recognition to the Amazon Alexa hardware SDK.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Take advantage of their billions of dollars of research and not reinvent the wheel.
Okay. Cool.
I think I'm okay with Bezos knowing how I like my toast. I'm fine.
All right. Good examples. All right. So next up, we're going to do context. I've got 7 minutes here. People are cruising pretty quick, so I don't think we're going to need that much time. Yeah, basically, so we at least have kind of like put a boundary around what it is that we think is important. We've decided what's significant. So the next step is context. What are the forces at play? What are the facts of the world that we need to kind of share about this type of decision? Were there any alternatives you considered, or are there different things that that were out there that you were talking about? Generally, we want to try and keep these things brief. Okay, so the ADR itself is usually a page, maybe two, definitely no more. Less is better in a lot of cases for these. Okay. Yeah, so context is going to be the next bit. So statements of fact about the world that kind of are the stage for this decision.
You do a lot of linking to like other documents?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I'll link liberally to other ADRs, to reference material, blog posts, whatever it is to kind of help get the idea across or kind of explain things. So, all right, yeah, about 7 minutes or so. Go ahead.
Is it just an echo device at that point, or do you just tell?
So there's actually two things, but no, they actually have, so there's a device to like the Echo device, and then there's the hardware to be a device that when you talk to Echo, they talk back and forth. So, alright.
Oh, okay. So the
this like then you say like,
yeah.
Alexa, tell Mega Toaster to toast my bread, and then it somehow communicates back and forth, and then that hardware.
Are they putting that one in, or?
That's what I thought, but I didn't have a.
No, yeah.
Yeah, right, yeah. So there's two ways you can do hardware. Like one is you can like add Alexa to your device. The other way you can do it is your device interacts with someone's Echo. So that actually has a consequence. I don't know if we're there yet. Actually, people will be Echo to use. Yeah.
So what are some other things that influence the decision? Connectivity is more than
That's right. Chances are somebody wants a smart toaster, they're going to have an internet.
That's right.
I think just the proven accuracy of voice recognition and the fact that their model is retrained by not just us, but with probably other
It also allows us to get the international markets easier because they have all of that sorted out as well. Yeah.
Okay. Exert force influence on the decision is our marketing team saying we need to keep up with X, Y, and Z toaster. Yeah.
I guess that's not a question.
Yeah, like Amazon was letting you do
Mega
question YouTube on there is no something got rid of the YouTube app to like fight back, but it is vendor locked in, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So are there alternatives? You want to explain what that is?
Yeah, whereas getting.
Well, we kind of hinted at the one alternative, right? We said, alternative could have been perhaps doing in the toaster.
Yeah, the alternatives are like other.
Like this training program we could have done.
Okay, so let's list that.
Training, there's a limited domain where we can train certain words.
But why would we go with that?
Yeah, Google Home.
Well, like Microsoft is we're not paying for other voice recognition, but it's also like teaching people better. So
Any others, Kyle?
What is it? We sell it out to like for international phone service where there's people on the
how all startups work for machine learning.
It's interesting, they haven't assigned a toaster. We have smart toasters.
Yeah, like
When you design as a
Little push reminders. Have you written down someone's toe source? Consequences are. You never got into level 7.
Yeah, that's
Sure.
that's absolutely correct. That's right. No connection.
Yeah, never mind.
There's also good consequences, right?
I would say, like, especially as what's going on. It's not enough context. The alternatives, I guess, just like really long theory.
For the actual thread,
Yeah, so that's the cheaper the consequences would be, I think, kind of like right here, what's successful.
Really? Okay.
I guess there are ways to answer the other thing. So, like, yeah, like that's sort of like all this stuff.
Yeah. And then some of them, they were like, dealing with credit cards.
status acceptable.
Sets up a little Wi-Fi network, so that's what we can get into. We install malware on all their computers and start consuming voice activation software for you.
Okay, so let's do this. Let's do some sharing on this one. So, oh, I'm sorry. I guess I should ask. How's everyone doing? Do you need more time, or is that okay? You guys okay? All right, let's do it. Who's okay, or who feels comfortable sharing your context that you came up with? It's a friendly crowd. It's all good.
We'll go.
Oh, thank you.
We will use the Amazon Alexa SDK hardware, and we will use this because of the speed to market, proven accuracy, user trust, and the international markets that we'll have access to. As for like potential consequences, we have like data trust issues.
Oh, sorry. Hold on. We're still talking about context.
Oh,
so
context.
yeah, sorry. We're going like baby steps right now,
sorry.
but yeah, we're ahead of the curve, and that's cool.
Okay.
But all right. So what was like read that context back again?
I guess yeah. This will help us like get to market faster.
Okay.
And it
So-
has like proven accuracy, and kind of like a big ecosystem of users and testers, and like we can hedge off of the Amazon, like war chest, and it will enable us to reach international markets as well.
Okay. Cool. All right. So I guess I've got some thoughts if you guys are open to feedback on that. But I'd like to hear what did everybody else think of that as a consequence,
Well, for context.
or as a context,
Yeah.
right?
So we kind of came to the same decision maybe to use Alexa. One of ours was voice recognition is hard, and we have to run it on a toaster. So it's really hard. So we're gonna let Amazon figure that out. Also, in-house knowledge, we have to hire someone who can do voice recognition, and we don't want to do that.
Okay.
So we're gonna outsource all that to Amazon. Also, privacy issues, we don't want to be directly responsible for that. So again, we're just going to transfer the risk to Amazon. That was
Fantastic,
context
yeah.
in our voice activation decisions.
So with these two things, I'm hearing a lot of quality attributes, right? So privacy is important, right? And you've got some statements about what that means. The security is important, some statements about what that means. I think for your group, you actually, I heard it as a consequence. If you back it up a little bit further, time to market is important, right? Like speed of delivery is important. Those are the facts, right? And even if you can like reference stuff, as we were talking about before, like I don't know, maybe there's a memo from the VP that says, oh, we got to ship fast or something like that. Those are all really good facts to bring together to form your context. A good technique, and this is something I've seen lots of teams do, or even myself as I'm going through it, write down the context, write down what you think the forces are, give it another read through. And then in some of those cases, you ended up with consequences, the things that you want, move them down to the consequences, and then ask the next question. Well, why was that so important? What led us to wanting that thing, right? Because that is also super important. That's really your rationale, right? When I see that kind of stuff working with teammates, there's like a hidden assumption there that we want to get out into the open, and that's why I probe on those types of things. What else? Anybody else? Did that make sense to everyone? Okay. Cool. All right. Well, since we're doing baby steps here, consequences is the last step of this, and it sounds like some people are a bit ahead, so we're gonna cut it a little bit shorter. I wasn't sure how long folks would need. So with this, it's really as a result of the decision that you've made. How does the world change? What changes as a result of the decision? Sometimes think about risks, or think about things that must be done now that you have put this thing in play. Did you create more work for yourself? Do you know how to do everything, or do you have to go figure some stuff out? And as a rule of thumb with this, look for at least 3. More is better. Generally speaking, the first couple that you come up with are probably going to be lame consequences. I'll be perfectly honest. It's when you start to get 5, 6, 7 types of things, all of a sudden interesting stuff pops out, and those are the things that probably could have killed your project. So it's when you really start to dig that the kind of neat stuff starts to come to light. So take a couple minutes and outline a couple of consequences of your decision. So go.
We don't know how Alexa really works, or like how
It could be. So maybe you're choosing to take process. So that's a consequence. Presented yourself.
Our system recognizes it as
that could be something. It's not necessarily all risks. Because risks are like a.
They can help drive.
Really know as much.
Do you also typically document actually good
we don't know.
consequences? Consequence is not always negative, right?
So I should mention that. Good and bad. Yeah, you want to get good things and bad. So we're going to be able to our good security. Maybe it's more difficult to maintain.
Okay.
So sorry, I should have mentioned that. It's a really good point.
Okay. So I think we kind of have two, right? So no internet, no toast, but on the flip side, over time, you can collect data on the user.
It sounds silly, but
Start
we're also
fine tuning your toasting algorithms, right?
Like if they
Yeah,
are
right. Yeah, it's a vendor lock.
Take over Google.
I don't think they're going anywhere.
You can decide that we can just go with
Hackers took over a small company's toaster line. Listened in on families talking.
That's right. Punch in your username and password.
Well, I guess there are
like it.
questions about. I'm assuming
Yeah,
about
that's right.
Alexa, type products. They don't do other languages very well.
There's also, we and they talked about privacy with Alexa in the same manner, but there's also a privacy around concerns around Alexa.
Vulnerabilities on
could
toasters
really should be your contact.
And vendor lock isn't just downtime going out to business.
So as a downtime analysis, set you need to incorporate. Let's say we use NGO services and all of a sudden there's people in antitrust. So we can think about whether we want to protect this contact upfront and like making sure it's actually or Google Home takes over.
Maybe they don't get it. It's highly possible.
Yeah, that's right. Just host it ourselves.
Colorado.
The picture had messages on it.
was writing like literal messages. Just anything you say, it shoots out toast with that phrase on it. But you can also be like having a toast, you know, you could be like, please toast at 5 a.m. So when you get up at 5 to 7, the toast is there.
Yeah. Or you could say like when mom goes to toast, tell her I hate her. And then the toast comes up, it's like I hate you, Mom.
All right. How's everybody doing?
No. The second toast
Good.
says you're adopted. Yeah.
Good. Do one more minute. You okay? Good enough. All right. That's pretty solid. You're good. All right, let's do it. So we'll do the same thing. So so you've got your first ADR. What were some of the consequences that you came up with as a result of your decision? Yes.
It could influence the design change or whatever change on the operation of the clients could increase or decrease the cognitive load of the person using it.
Okay. Yeah, so you're influencing the other components within the overall.
It requires additional training by the operator.
Fantastic.
As a minus.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So you've created more work, more cost. You're going to have to get approvals for that, or add work for that, support whatever group that is that's going to do the training. Yeah.
Our decision was to implement a cloud backend for all of our algorithms and whatnot. So a few of the consequences are, no connection, no toast, which is obviously a bad one.
True.
on the plus side, if you're a snowbird, if you have a second home or something, all your profiles for your toast are automatically ported there. So you don't,
toast profiles, wonderful.
the portability aspect.
Okay, cool.
Keeps home with you.
All right. So, group in the back, if I can pick on something you guys said earlier, you were talking about like SMEs and things like that earlier, right? Was one of your contexts, like you're assuming there's certain, I guess, access to people who know what's going on was part of your context?
Right. One of the follow-on consequences for that is, well, we no longer need an SME for voice recognition. We now need an Amazon Services SME.
Just moved it around. Yeah. That's good though. Yeah.
Another consequence of this is by leveraging Alexa platform, we no longer need to worry about the microphone and speaker hardware, any of that. We can just offload that part of the design and let people use their existing Alexa device.
Yeah, it's a very positive consequence.
Right.
Yeah, good thing to call out. Awesome. All right, so let's see here. What are 8:30, right? So we've got like 15 minutes. All right, I think we're going to jump around a bit. So I originally had us doing a second ADR, which we could do if people want to do, or I can share some other stuff about like how putting these things in practice. We can kind of improvise a bit. Cool. So let's see here. So first of all, I think most of the patterns that I saw tonight from the things that everyone was sharing, that's basically what a new person is going to go through. So anyone who's kind of new to these ADRs technique, whether it's a junior person, senior person, whoever, those are the types of things that people are going to, typically trip over, kind of the format of it, or like I've seen entire paragraphs as a decision, taking all the consequences, and the whole decision is just in the context, and then they're like, well, what am I supposed to put for consequences? Like, okay, well, massage it, break it down a little bit. And the reason for that kind of stuff is this is meant to be a tool to kind of aid with thinking, right? Is really the main part of it. Let's see what this one is. I don't remember. Yeah, this one's pretty good. Okay, so we've got a paper that's out that you can read on this stuff that talks about an adoption of ADRs for a system that looked kind of like that, mostly. There's probably not enough lines. It got pretty gnarly. Things went to hell, and then we started bringing in ADRs like we talked about tonight. Where's my graphs? Here we go. It was about a 2-year journey, I think, for leveling up the team. Okay, so serious investment in terms of coaching, right? This isn't like an overnight kind of fix. This is, what is this, going back to 2016 to 2018, so a 2-year kind of case study of this part. Let's see, we're looking at people, and I can show a breakdown by repository, by like code modules if I can find that slide deck. In this particular talk, we were interested in how well are we decentralizing design authority. So in the beginning, it basically started with me doing a lot of the work. We kind of talked about that earlier. So that was what I was doing. I was kind of wrangling the team. I was onboarding a lot of people to these concepts. I was the one who was doing most of the documentation for this stuff. I was basically the architect. So it was a very hierarchic, top-down sort of a model in that case. As a result of that, I basically didn't do anything else. My code commits, tanked. Wasn't really doing anything other than documentation and design type of work. Over time, as we were able to level up the team, what we saw is I was still contributing a pretty good chunk, but I had other champions that I could work with. So I was able to identify other people who were either inclined, excited, good at it, whatever the case may be. Eventually getting to the point where I was no longer the primary contributor. The team as a whole was doing way more than I was. In some cases, Joe, in this case, was doing even more than I was towards the end. He was taking full ownership over certain components and modules, whereas in the beginning, he was, I think he was a new grad, straight out of university in 2016. What we saw, not everybody wanted to do this, and that's okay. So the goal in this particular experiment was, decentralizing. And while we saw some people really start to adopt, other people, they would try it once, twice, and then, they're happy to contribute PRs, contribute to reviews, but not necessarily authoring, and that's okay.
So for those that were not on board for doing the contribution, were they at least on board with consuming the ADRs and using what you were building?
Yes, everyone on the team generally recognized this as a good technique. Just not everybody wanted to write or was their mind was not in that mode. I'll pick on Chuck because I like Chuck. He was loving on the DevOps at the time, and I was more than happy to let him do that, right? So he was doing tons of DevOps kind of work, and as a result, wasn't doing as much architectural, like design documentation kind of work. And that was cool because everybody was doing what they wanted to do. However, we still work closely together to kind of have, the team as a whole was really good, right? We were complete as a group. So there were no detractors. I guess what would happen if there were a detractor, somebody who just wasn't down with it? I don't know. That would be. It definitely takes time to kind of onboard, but I don't know that I've had anyone like actively fight me on this idea. So let's see what else we got. Oh yeah, I do have this stuff, so I can actually show this. So we'll just keep rolling here. So how did this actually play out across the system? So here's a breakdown of services. So this is a microservices environment. And on the, what is that, the column on the side there with the names protected, to protect the change, to protect the innocent or the guilty, whoever they are, percentage of code commits to an individual service. And I guess if I were to pose a question, who are the likely architects for any given service? Who would you point to as the one who has kind of the design authority in that space?
The one doing less commits, maybe?
One doing fewer commits,
yeah.
Okay. Typically, we saw it was the opposite, actually. The people doing the most commits were the ones with the most influence, and we kind of, called them, those are the architects of that service. I shared these slides with a CMU class, architecture class once, and they got out pitchforks and were very upset that I was just calling anybody who wanted an architect. But that's what it is. It doesn't, everybody should be an architect. So, if you have influence.
Architects should know how to code.
And architects should know how to code, exactly.
They can write your toaster after we go to your house.
That's right. How else am I going to toast my toast
I was gonna ask
in
you
my?
keep Gary, Larry, Barry, and Harry all straight. The names have been changed, I understand.
Yeah, Gary especially. I don't know what Gary's up to, but he's everywhere. Anyway, yeah. So these were the people that had kind of the most influence for each of these things. What's cool about this though is, we've got everybody involved in different things. Bullwinkle there. It's working on our service D. Susanna in a couple of places. Barry, Larry in a couple places. Right. So Yoda. I don't know what Yoda's doing down there, but we can answer some more stuff with this too, which is kind of neat. Which services might you say have poor design integrity?
The ones with lots of contributors?
Yeah, I can tell you service F was a dumpster fire. Service B was not far behind. So when there was not, we do need some authority is the main lesson from this, but it doesn't have to be the same person. We can kind of decentralize and have different people in charge of different things. And I think the only reason that worked in this particular context was because we were using a technique like ADRs to allow people to explore, but then also bring it back together in a documented way. So that was pretty cool. Let's see what else we got here. Yeah, it's just more of the same kind of stuff. So, okay. Why don't we just call it there? I'm going to put up some references and we'll figure out how to get these slides out to folks because this is some good stuff. So decision records, decision logs, cool, since 1997, maybe even sooner, earlier, whatever it is, older than that. There's a lot of really great literature on this topic if you're so inclined. The 2005 Tyree and Ackerman paper is pretty darn good on this topic. If you want books, Architecture and Practice and Documenting Software Architectures are also solid. And I already referenced the Nygaard talk. Looks like I was in the middle of editing this and abandoned it. Oh, yeah, should have put my book on there, but whatever. Lots of papers on recent stuff. So these are all, I've been sharing snippets and bits and pieces from a lot of these things, but there's a handful of papers, videos, stuff like that out there. And if you're looking for more templates and examples, where's my mouse? Oh no. Oh, I got code. All right. This stuff, if it links, come on now. Okay, well, whatever. I would like to show you this, but I'm not able to open these things very easily. No internet, and that's why. All's good. I should have connected it ahead of time. What you'll see on those pages are lists of templates, different things you can try out, different things you can use, not just the one template that I showed, probably 6, 7, 8 different types that people have been experimenting with. Links to even more resources. There's a lot of case studies out there with this stuff. So it's, pretty wide amount of stuff. And then I mentioned this fellow here, Ken Power. You can find a video of his on YouTube just by following that amazing link there. I'll get these up online someplace for people to be able to find them. But yeah, with that, so I'm a big subscriber to the silver toolbox method. So I can't give you a silver bullet, okay, but I can give you a silver toolbox. This is one more tool for that toolbox, hopefully. And I do have a book, I guess is my minor plug. It does talk about ADRs in there as well. So you can check that out for some of the things we talked about today for even more detail. Yeah, with that, I guess if there's any questions, I'm happy to stick around. Otherwise, thank you very much and have a fantastic evening.